All right, so for today's practice question, it ties back to one of the big things we talked about on Wednesday, which was pyramid, right, that goes over the different audiences for communication. So we might recall at the very tippy top, we've got intrapersonal communication. That's having a conversation with yourself. You know, maybe you're talking in the mirror, talking in the car, getting jazzed for the day. The very bottom, right, we have mediated communication that's reaching a large audience through things including social media. So in this question, I'm mentioning Rebecca is talking to 3 other coworkers about a candidate to hire for a new job. So which category best fits? Raise your hand if you put A, interpersonal communication. B, interpersonal communication. C, group communication. Yes, so this is group communication. This is a pretty easy one, but it's a chance for us to just review from last class, right? So we think back to the pyramid and the different styles of communication that we can do. And, right, this kind of fits right here. So in the middle, we've got group communication. That's usually, you know, anywhere from like 3 to maybe a dozen people. We use group communication all the time when we get into small groups, when we do stuff such as an interview with several candidates and so on, right? So group communication fits there. Intrapersonal communication is just one person. Interpersonal communication is just 2. So that makes this the best answer to that question. Then mediated communication would be using something like a cell phone app and so on to engage. So great job. Before we get started on some of the new stuff for today, is there anybody here for the first time? We've mostly got returning folks, which is awesome. I know adding and dropping and changing around can happen, so hopefully after this week, we're able to stabilize and get to know each other even better. So last class, we went through the Mozilla blog post. That was the one that was talking about friends on the internet and gave us the chance to think about how our relationships with other people have definitely changed over the past year of COVID-19, right? We've had people mention that, you know, they've had some good, close relationships that have happened online, but a lot of them have fizzled out. Or maybe we're closer face-to-face to people like family members than we used to be. But we were looking at how our interpersonal communication has definitely been in flux in this challenging time and how it's changed our relationships. We also did kind of a quick crash course of communication as a discipline, right? Not only looking at that pyramid, but also understanding the sort of signifier, signified semiotics approach. So I talked a lot about laughing emojis and apples on Wednesday. Help us understand, right? We use symbols to convey reality and shared meaning. So for today's class, I want to build on that and really get into the nitty-gritty of interpersonal communication itself, right? Both in terms of how we use and convey messages with interpersonal communication. We'll be talking a lot today about uncertainty reduction theory and the idea that we especially engage in interpersonal communication as a way of reducing the anxieties, the fears, the concerns that we have about other people. We'll be looking at an example through the TV show Catfish. Right? So if you're familiar with the idea of catfishing or including kind of false information about yourself to other people in order to lure them in, right? That's a practice that really ties itself to uncertainty and interpersonal communication. We'll talk a little bit about listening and ethics too. What does it mean to be a good listener and to engage in ethical interpersonal communication? So, one way to start thinking about this, right, is to ask ourselves, why do we communicate with each other? So, you might think about the average day. Why do you communicate with other people? Yeah.
To make plans.
Make plans, right? So you, maybe a friend, trying to figure out, you know, you're going to meet up after school, what are you going to do, right? Making plans and figuring out how to map out your life is really important. Why else do we communicate?
Out of necessity, like to figure things out.
Yeah, figuring things out, right? Maybe you and a friend are trying to figure out how to pay rent and, you know, work out, you know, who's going to make food for today, all of those types of details, right? We have a lot of these important, essential things we've got to do and we've got to communicate about. Why else do we communicate? Yeah, right? Needs, things we see as super important to us. So maybe think about it not just in terms of these necessities, but socially. Why else might we communicate?
Share feelings, emotions.
Yeah, sharing feelings, emotions, right? Telling folks how we're doing, checking in. You know, in the United States, one of the most common greetings is, how are you? And oftentimes, right, we just do it as a quick check-in. Oh, I'm good, how are you? You know, it's usually fairly brief. And oftentimes in the US, right, we say, oh, how are you? And if somebody gets into a really long, oh, well, I feel really kind of stressed out today. I had this and this and this happen, right? If you're good friends with somebody, maybe they're going to disclose a little bit more about their thoughts and feelings. But if it's a casual person, they're probably going to be, you know, pretty brief there. So I like this point, right, not only in terms of our needs, but also in terms of feelings, thoughts, ideas to other people. How many of you have heard of or seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Yeah, so about half, right? If you haven't, that's okay, right? We're here to learn. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a great way of thinking about why we do interpersonal communication. So as a refresher or introduction to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we can think about communication as fitting under 3 different types of needs. And again, we have a pyramid. I promise this class is not a pyramid scheme. So we have here, right, physical, social, personal needs. So physical needs get to a lot of the things that were brought up already, this idea of necessity. So, you know, maybe you're really parched and you're talking to a friend and your friend is, you know, sitting right next to a water fountain. And you say to your friend, hey, can I go get some water, right? That's a physical need. And it ties really well to the very bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. So Maslow's hierarchy starts at the bottom, works its way up, right? At the very bottom, we have these kinds of physiological needs. I'm thirsty, and you're probably, if it's urgent, going to get a drink before you feel comfortable talking to your friend about anything else, right? Basic things like food, water, all of those elements, right, are things that are the highest priority for us. We have to start at the base before we can work our way up. So we'll use interpersonal communication most often to start out by communicating those things. Hey, can I have a piece of pizza, right? So once we've done the very, very basic level, we kind of move on to safety. And one way to think about this hierarchy is as we go up, we're getting longer and longer term security. So we get the basic things that we need, the food and water in the moment. We're going to want safety and security, right? We're going to want to check in. Maybe there's a roommate and we tell them, hey, let's pay rent this month. How are we going to pay rent? You want to make sure that you have a place to live and that you and them are able to work out that kind of arrangement. So that safety need is incredibly important. You want to have a comfortable space now that you've got food and water and the immediate pangs that your body is giving you, right? Above that, we have this idea of love and belonging. This is helpful not only for us as humans, right, as social creatures who are trying to look to others to survive, but feeling a friendship or connection or positive relationship with somebody else is essential for us to feel like we're getting access to food, water, safety, security, and so on, right? If I have a good relationship with my roommate, if I'm good friends with them, then it's more likely that we'll be able to pay rent with each other. We're less likely to have a communication breakdown or problem where one person gets thrown out of the apartment or something like that, right? So we seek relationships. They both help us, but they also ensure that good relationship makes these bottom 2 needs met a little bit better. Above that, right, we have esteem. This ties into self-esteem, a really important element of interpersonal communication. Self-esteem is an issue that particularly, right, teenagers and young adults feel a unique challenge toward, right? One issue that's brought up a lot in the context of young adults and teenagers is the challenge of low self-esteem, right? Society maybe has unrealistic expectations, such as beauty and fashion. We oftentimes are in the process of trying to figure out who we are, right? The quest for identity is the modern pilgrimage. We're trying to figure out and make sense of ourselves. So oftentimes our esteem or self-esteem, how we value ourselves, whether or not we feel good about ourselves is really important. We look to others to validation, right? Because they see us a lot more than we do. We care about how other people judge and think about us. And so we'll use interpersonal communication to check in with other people. Maybe it's offering compliments, right? Compliments on physical appearance, on somebody's personality, say, hey, you're a really good friend. We'll seek that type of comfort to, again, further build on those relationships that we see as essential to a lot of those needs. Then at the very top, we have this idea of self-actualization. So if we've got everything else under that, if we're feeling good, we're feeling secure, we're feeling safe, we're feeling valued as humans, we'll use communication in order to reach our major goals and things that we'd like out of life. So maybe once you've worked out, everything with finances with your roommate, you've got a good place to live, you're feeling good, maybe you and a friend go rock climbing or go hiking over the weekend, right? You're able to focus on things that you'd really like to do to grow as a person because you don't have those other things going on in your mind that are affecting your ability to do the things that you want. So one thing that's important to know for every class, and this class included, especially if this is your first year here as a college student, right, is that no textbook is gospel, right? In fact, I encourage you to continue to think critically, to disagree, to offer, your own perspectives and ideas, because theories, concepts, ideas like these are always changing, and there's always ways that they're revised, challenged, and so on, right? If we didn't have various theories and ideas being challenged, then we would have a lot of problems right now, right? We'd still believe that all the planets rotated around the Earth. We'd still believe in things like race science, which is not a thing, right? So it's important for us to critique and push back against various ideas, right? And here, right, there's been critiques of Maslow's hierarchy. There are folks that say, especially depending on culture and identity and perspective, that perhaps achieving love, belonging, inclusion, especially among cultures that are more collectivist, cultures that focus more on groups working together over individual achievement, might be more important because once you create that love and belonging and connection with other people, that makes it easier for you to achieve your safety and physiological needs. So sometimes we move out of order, right? So there are exceptions. But I think this helps us to understand and make sense of the idea that we want to be heard, we want to be understood, we feel better when we communicate because we're getting our feelings and thoughts out there, right? And it's always good for us to feel like the other person understands and is listening to what we have to say. If you're talking to a wall or somebody else goes in the other room, it doesn't feel like they're reciprocating, then we're going to feel frustrated. So I'd like you to do this short prompt on your own. This will count as your attendance for today. Grab a sheet of paper or find somebody else in the class that has a sheet of paper themselves. And I just want you to take a couple minutes and jot down some words that you would use to describe yourself. Maybe these are words that people have used to describe you in the past. Maybe it's the first words that come into mind when you're asked to describe who you are as a person. Make sure your first and last name is on the sheet of paper when I grab it later. But, just write the words that come to mind. And then we'll go around after this, and I'll ask everybody to share the words that they chose for themselves. There's also a not so subtle way for me to try to get your names down a bit better. Give me a minute or two to work on that. go ahead and finish up the current word or thought that you write. Again, doesn't need to be exhaustive, just words that feel right. So, I'm going to ask us to go through, and as we're going and sharing, make sure to let us know your name. So, why don't we start right here in the front?
My name's JP Fredrickson, and I put down nerd, caring, athlete, funny, encouraging, annoying, gamer, and persistent.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thanks, JP.
My name is Olivia Kurd, and I said outgoing, also persistent, and spontaneous.
Awesome. Thanks, Olivia. JP, Olivia.
Anna Medina. Kind, compassionate, sassy, passionate, stubborn, outgoing, strong, weird, loud, annoying, and dedicated.
And the first name one more time.
Anani.
Anami?
Anani.
Anani.
Yep.
Awesome. Anani.
Yep.
Got it. JP, Olivia, Anani.
My name is Katie Brown. I put organized, indecisive, hardworking, cautious, punctual, empathetic, athletic, friendly, perfectionist, and overthinking.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. These are way more words than the morning class. Y'all are killing it so far. I think they capped in the morning at like 3. So y'all are doing great.
My name's Hayden. Some of the words I put were confident, loud, courageous, outgoing, open-minded, entertaining.
Thanks, Hayden. Let's go to the second row.
My name's Alexis, so I put shy, nice, sincere, organized, observant, goal-oriented, problem solver, and trustworthy.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexis.
Jill. And I put intelligent, determined, observant, passionate, and kind.
Great. Sis, Jill. Let's go to the end of the second row here.
My name is Rolando Castillo. I put friendly, fun, happy, caring, nice. Yeah.
Rolando.
My name is Brenna. I put friendly, kind, funny, good-hearted, shy, somewhat of a perfectionist, and open.
Great. Thanks, Brenna.
Natalie, and put hardworking, smart, Christian, studious, fun, bossy, loyal, and a pleasure
So we'll talk about this in a little bit, but self-disclosure, right? Good, honest self-disclosure. Awesome. Thanks, Doug. Maybe honest, maybe not.
I'm Kenna. I put fun, outgoing, anxious, supportive, stubborn, and energetic.
Thanks, Kenna.
I'm Izzy, and I put laid back, understanding, caring, an animal person, argumentative, indecisive, and a plant addict.
Like gardening or like
House plants.
house plants. Oh, yeah.
A lot.
I'm so bad that I kill succulents. So I appreciate you.
My name is Bailey. I put caring, stubborn, friendly, accepting, unforgiving, and funny.
Yeah.
I'm Trey. I'll put friendly, caring, tall, supportive, and athlete.
Great. Thanks, Trey. And let's go here to the back.
Outdoors, I put creative, persistent, stubborn, anxious, empathic, quiet, and assertive.
And can I get your name one more time?
Sawyer.
Sawyer. Awesome. Thanks.
I'm Steve, and I put friendly, private, determined, and creative.
Thanks, Steve. All right. Got just a few more folks.
I'm Katie Hackett. I put crazy, confrontational, laid back. I have a lot of words. Stubborn, perfectionist, open-minded, chaotic.
Awesome. I feel like, with work, you have to have this professional persona, but you get this chaotic energy that just builds and builds and builds. mask or persona that you have that, yeah, it's just nice to be able to unwind. A couple more folks.
I'm Jason. I said friendly, kind, go-getter, caring, respectful, and honest.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
I'm Tucker. I put friendly, outgoing, athlete, loud, and hardworking.
Awesome. Thanks, Tucker. Yeah, so I think it's not only fun to hear some of the ways that you all describe yourselves, but, right, we communicate, we use interpersonal communication to establish who we are just by difference, right? Our ability to create self-concept, which is our sense of who we are as a unique person compared to other people, is only possible because of communication. We have the word tall, right, to describe something like physical height, and we would otherwise not be able to compare, oh, I'm tall, I'm short, unless we had that word and way of comparing ourselves to other people. A lot of folks mentioned that they were outgoing, that they were, maybe chaotic, right? Well, we have to have some way to compare that. What does it mean to be outgoing? Well, that's something we've built among each other over time. Maybe we talk a lot, maybe we use gestures a lot, maybe we initiate conversation a lot. It's something that we've created over time, through socialization as a way to get to know what that word means. So what makes us as humans especially unique is that while there's a lot of other animal species that have unique forms of communication, right, like, whale songs and so on, we have these symbols that we use to communicate, to define who we are, and to define who we are relationally, right? A lot of folks in communication, such as Kenneth Burke, right, talk about the idea that we know who we are because we know who we're not, right? So when you say, I'm tall, you're saying I'm not normal size, I'm not short, right? I am this, not this. I also found it really interesting some of the ways that you all chose to sequence and prioritize some of the items about yourself, right? So some of you might have started with, I'm outgoing, I'm friendly, or I'm hardworking, right? One thing we think about a lot is when we present ourselves and when we present, we've got a lot of different parts of ourselves. What are the things that come to the surface that are the most important to us and that we choose to put first when we talk with other people? One thing I noticed in my morning class was that a lot of folks put something like athlete or hardworking first. They wanted to emphasize the things that they were doing with their profession or the activities that they're involved in first because that's a big part of who they are and what they try to do. One thing I noticed here was that a lot more folks emphasized and prioritized certain personality traits. Your degree of introversion or extroversion, how social are you? Are you nerdy? Are you hardworking, right? It's interesting to see that you all oftentimes were putting some of those things higher. Because we're not only making decisions about who we are compared to other people, but also making decisions about what we emphasize to other people. And that relates really closely to uncertainty reduction and the way that we disclose over time. Right? So self-concept is this idea that we define ourselves as unique and different from people around us. Self-concept and self-esteem are oftentimes the two things that are pretty closely compared to each other. So I think the best way to think about this is that self-concept doesn't really have a judgment, right? It doesn't use a value comparison to say being tall or being short or being loud or being quiet is a good or a bad thing. It just says, I recognize that I'm my own person and I'm distinct from people around me. I am a nerdy person, which means that compared to the average person, I probably know a little bit more about Star Trek. So comparison is a way for us to create self-concept. And then self-esteem is that value judgment, is now that we know who we are, is that a good or a bad thing, right? How the heck do we rank or judge things like that? Well, it's a lot of factors, including culture, right, and context that affect things like that. So for instance, if you're among a group of people who, do not enjoy talking about nerdy or intellectual subjects, then maybe that's going to impact self-esteem and be seen as a bad thing. You grew up in a household where a lot of your siblings were just not into reading books, and so it was seen as not a good thing. Or maybe being tall is seen as a good thing because, it's seen as being good at various activities like sports, so on, right? You can reach high things, you can grab paper towels on top of the fridge, right? You can do all sorts of stuff. So we're the ones who assign that meaning and that judgment, and we use interpersonal communication to do that, to make that comparison through self-esteem. So uncertainty reduction theory, right, is one of the major components of the way that we disclose and engage in interpersonal communication with other people, right? I asked at the beginning of class, why do we communicate? And to reduce uncertainty about other people is a huge part of that. How many folks are familiar with what a theory is? Kind of in general. Seeing some nodding, right? So you can think about theory as essentially like a helicopter going up in the air and zooming out, right? It provides a zoomed out, essentially description of how the world happens. So a theory is trying to be as general as possible and say, this is what happens in the world. We develop theories over time, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a theory to explain how we seek things that fit, right? Gravity is a theory. I think that if I drop this marker, it's going to fall to the ground, right? I've used gravity as a theory to believe that it will. So in the same way, uncertainty reduction theory is not flawless, it's not gospel, but it's a way to explain how humans behave. And this comes from Charles Berger and Richard Calabrese, two kind of social scientists who are concerned with why we communicate and engage with each other. So I mentioned catfish, right? It is both a practice that happens a lot over the internet, especially in the context of online dating. But it's also a TV show that essentially involves the hosts having somebody meet a person that they only know online for the first time face to face. Most of the time when they actually go and meet up, it's not who they expected. Their gender, their identity, their behavior is just totally different, and they've misled. So uncertainty reduction theory can be explained a lot through this example, because we communicate with other people in order to reduce both the cognitive and behavioral uncertainty that we have about them. So I want to unpack both of those a little bit, right? I like to think about cognitive as kind of like the gears that are turning in your head, right? It's how you're thinking about or addressing this person. So we did a lot of uncertainty reduction just now. We learned a lot more about each other. We learned that, we've got a lot of outgoing, maybe chaotic, maybe silly, maybe fun folks in the class, right? Although I feel like a lot of us knew that already. Right, uncertainty reduction theory is a way that we can cognitively understand and know who the other person is better. That's good for us because, right, as humans, stranger danger, right, fight or flight, we are oftentimes really compelled to know the other person as well as possible, because if we do, as humans, we like patterns and we like predicting behavior from other people. That way we can ensure that we're safe, that we're secure, right, that this person isn't going to hurt us, but that day in, day out, we mentally know what to expect. If I have a really chatty coworker who is in the office right next to mine, and I know every day he's going to get into this half-hour conversation with me, which may or may not be a true story, then I'm going to prepare and maybe leave for work early, either so I miss him or so that I give myself enough time to have a good conversation with him, right? We like to know and predict how other people are going to act. If you took your family's car without telling them, you want to know how they're going to respond. Are they going to be angry, or have you worked out an agreement with them about that, right? So uncertainty reduction theory is important at a cognitive level, but also at a behavioral level. What are other people going to do? And this goes back again to fight or flight, and avoiding people that we might see as violent or dangerous, depending on the situation. So if you're feeling safe, if you're feeling comfortable with somebody like a roommate, right, that's really important to us, and creating that kind of safety is important. Especially when it comes to online dating, right? A lot of people will make the decision to have a good amount of conversation online before they feel comfortable meeting up face to face. And that's to try to figure out, is this person who they say they are? Can I get along with this person? Do I feel safe with this person, right? There's still a risk, but that risk can be reduced by predicting their behavior based on their actions online. So there's a few different ways that we reduce uncertainty. One of the major ways we do this is passive, right? So we're just observing or scouting what's going on. So for instance, for this class, you probably picked up on a lot of the words that other people were using to describe themselves. Just passively thinking, okay, there's a lot of outgoing people here. That's good, right? This goes back to a lot of primates who will use a lot of different observational tactics in order to, learn for themselves. They see that the other monkey died from eating the bad berries, they're not going to eat the bad berries, right? So passive and observational learning is a way that we reduce our uncertainty about other people. Somebody starts yelling at their coworker and screaming, even though you might not have had anything other than a positive interaction with them, you're going to have your guard up and you're going to be a little bit worried about them, right? We also use active strategies. So how many of you have stalked and or browsed somebody's social media profile to get to know them better? Yeah, a lot of you, right? It's something we do a lot, right? You start checking out somebody's Facebook profile or Instagram or whatever else because, maybe you're interested in this person, you want to get to know them better, maybe you want to be friends, right? But you want to figure out, who is this person? Can I get along with them? Why the heck do they have a photo with pineapple on pizza? You can't be friends, right? Interactive is usually the most effective way that we communicate. It's where we directly talk to the other person. And as a result of that, get our questions answered, we get to know them better, we feel good. And that gets to the idea that self-disclosure, more specifically reciprocal self-disclosure, is the easiest way that we reduce our uncertainty. Reciprocal here means that you're disclosing and you're sharing about yourself and they're sharing about themselves too. Oftentimes, especially if we don't know folks, studies suggest that our self-disclosure is very back and forth. We try to make it as even as possible with each other, right? So oftentimes when we're just starting to talk to people, our conversations can feel a little bit stilted. How are you doing? Where did you go to school? Oh, cool. Where did you go to school, right? It definitely feels like you and the other person are trying to map out the terrain. But as you get to know and feel more comfortable with somebody, these self-disclosures become less and less reciprocal, right? Over time, maybe somebody's had a really bad day and wants to vent with you about their ex. And because you've created that good friendship and relationship with them, you both have the space to do that. Where one person shares a lot more, other person listens, back and forth, right? So we choose to disclose over time, and there's a lot of things that guide our decisions. One of them is the other person's ability to reward or punish us. So one thing that we oftentimes are concerned about is oversharing. Are we sharing or disclosing an amount that's appropriate for how well we know the other person? We can oftentimes feel like a social faux pas. We feel a little bit awkward or uncomfortable because another person is sharing too much, or we worry about sharing too much, like talking about exes on a first date, right? There's a lot of anxiety we might feel there. We also might see this in the context of employment. So we're really interested in self-disclosure. We're interviewing for a job, and we want to make sure that the employer knows us and likes us and sees us as a good fit, right? Additionally, and this kind of runs both ways, there's a question of whether or not the person that we're meeting and talking to fits or violates their expectations, right? So you go on a date with somebody and they seem really similar to how they behaved online. You're going to feel more comfortable, maybe more willing to disclose because they were honest and you feel more trusting. This also runs the other direction though, where if there's somebody that's completely different and unexpected and surprising, maybe you're compelled to get to know them and find them interesting based on that, right? Where somebody in the class is really exciting and interesting and you think, I don't know who this person is. I want to get to know them better. So it can sometimes run both directions. And then the other issue, right, is whether or not we'll see this person again. How many folks have experienced road rage while driving? Yeah, a bunch of you, right? One of the reasons that road rage happens is because the person that's flipping you off or cutting you off, or honking at you, knows that they are almost certainly never going to see you again, right? Or maybe they'll see you again, but they'll have no idea. They won't remember the car. They won't remember who you are. Although, you know, LeGrand is a smaller town, so maybe they will. But the idea is that because it's so low stakes, we're not going to encounter the person again, right? People feel a lot more comfortable being disrespectful or doing that behavior, right? Where they honk, cut people off, and so on. So self-disclosure really ties itself well to whether or not we see the person again and whether or not we care about their opinion. We also tend to get a lot in a little when we do things such as meeting and talking and getting to know somebody, right? We look at them. How are they gesturing? What do their facial expressions look like? What are they wearing? Did they come in on time or late? Our brains are constantly picking up on and processing that information. So I want to show you a short trailer for the TV show Catfish that I think does a great job of talking through a lot of the steps that we've worked on together. Yep, it's not showing up here, is it?
Hey, Megan?
Let me try that.
I chose to get vaccinated because I'm a firefighter.
Isn't that fun? There are two screens. Reminds me of when I played my 3DS.
All I expected. She must be pretty awesome. At least from Facebook. How long have you been calling each other babe? 2 weeks, maybe. I'm good. Last night we had a great talk. She told me about how she makes an egg every day. Yeah. Megan, I take you to my room and drive you off, touching every inch of you. Megan is a dancer. She sings. She's an artist. Yeah. She's hot. The Facebook family, that's what we'll call them. I really care about this girl. I've had a real conversation with her. So you're full on going out? Because I don't know that much about her. I don't really want her getting hurt. So, next move. I think we drive up to Megan's farm in Michigan. This is it. Just pull it. You want to drive in? Drive in. Are you crazy? What do you mean? Drive into the driveway. What do you mean? Don't back into it.
The music takes a turn.
I'm scared. tip of the iceberg. You gotta be camera down.
So there's a lot to unpack here, right? In terms of uncertainty reduction and a lot of the things that we've been talking about so far in the class. So, right, we saw a lot of self-disclosure happening over time. You know, he's getting to know this Meg person and like looking at photos. There's a bit here where he's talking about how chicken makes an egg every day. They're sharing fun facts. You know, they're obviously like sexting by that point, right? They're finding out about each other's families. So over time, there's more self-disclosure, there's more comfort. But uncertainty reduction theory, there comes a point where we want to meet them face to face and feel like we can get that interaction to really feel safe with them, right? But as we see over time, he goes to this Michigan farm, things don't seem right, this person doesn't seem like who they said they were, things don't start adding up. So we can see through this example that we use uncertainty reduction over the course of our communication. We feel safer and safer. We're letting our guard down as we learn more about the person. But we also see, right, that we are putting our guard back up once we try to meet face to face and it doesn't work out very well. So uncertainty reduction theory is very much at play here in terms of the style of self-disclosure, meeting in person, and the challenges that might bring. So we want to talk about a couple more things before we go. So this is what we can refer to as the linear model of communication, right? So we'll talk a little bit more in the class about different models, but when we communicate interpersonally, whether to reduce uncertainty and so on, and also this will be available after class in case you need to see the slides later. So we have the sender, right? We've got this guy, I think Aaron is his name, who is sharing little details about himself. Where did he go to school? What are some of his favorite activities and hobbies, right? He's sending that information. You can think about encoding as like uploading, right? If you're uploading a photo or video to social media, it's where you take your message and you are writing it, right? You're putting it together or you're saying something in your head to somebody else. You transmit the message. Maybe it's face-to-face. Maybe it's using a cell phone, tablet, computer, and so on. The person receiving the message decodes it or downloads the message. So, you know, the other person who is clearly not who they say they are is getting this message. Oh, they feel comfortable sharing personal details, right? And the receiver is the person that takes that message in, right? So somebody sends a message, goes through a channel, gets downloaded, so on. There's also a couple issues that are happening through the process. One of them is noise. Noise can be physical, like if you've got a lawnmower or drill going on in another room, that's going to interfere. But it can also be physiological, like you're hungry or you're tired, so it's harder for you to focus or pay attention. It can also be psychological. Maybe you're distracted or thinking about something else, and so you're not focusing on the issue that's happening, right? But we also use feedback in order to change the message. One thing I brought up on Wednesday is like you're texting somebody and somebody has like the bubbles showing up, like they're about to send a text, and then you stop writing a text, right? We use feedback where we alter our communication based on how the person is responding. So maybe you notice that somebody seems really tired or stressed out as you're telling them a story. And you cut the story off and say, how are you doing, right? So this is kind of one model and way of thinking about the communication that we do, including communication to reduce uncertainty. So last thing before we get out of here, right, is talking about how to perceive and make up that information. We'll focus on it, right? We receive the information, we organize it, and make sense of it in our heads, and then we'll interpret it and assign meaning to that. There's a Netflix show called Dating Around where a character goes on like 5 different dates with other people and chooses one person. We'll look more at that later, but that's an example of using perception. We'll talk next class about listening and what it means to be a good listener. Long and short of it, right, is that we've got to walk in somebody else's shoes for a while, like Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Show emotional intelligence, understand how other people are doing. So we'll pick up more about that next week. Today, we talked about communication, about how we try to understand and reduce our uncertainty in other people, right? We also think about how listening skills, encoding and decoding messages can help us to be effective communicators. So for next Monday, we're going to do a writing workshop to talk about skills in writing and doing that well. So I'd like you to read the Purdue OWL link I have, as well as take a look at the EOU Writing Center resources. Also make sure by the end of the day today, if you haven't already, to complete that short anonymous Google form. Otherwise, you have nearly survived your first week of the year and maybe your first week of college ever, so congratulations. As you head out for the day, make sure to pass forward and turn in your attendance. I'll have your full attendance for the week marked up this afternoon. Have an awesome weekend, and I will see you again on Monday.